everybody to Blerdlines News. It's your host Cam. Along with me is,
Rest of D. What up, everybody?
and we are back for the quickness. A couple rumblings of things that happened recently. Nothing too crazy, but first off, we're gonna start off with Craven the Hunter is about to drop real shortly, and it's getting all the negative news and all the negative things. Probably rightfully so. It looks like it's one of those whys that Sony just was really trying to pull this Sinister Six universe. I hate that everything's a universe now. And it just they've been failing miserably. Madam Web stuff, Morbius. I tried to watch Madam Web 5 times and mostly on the plane, and I still couldn't get past like 20 minutes. And then Morbius, I think I got to 7 minutes, and I was like, nah, son, I just can't do it. Like, what do they? It's one of those things where like, it's like, if you know what it is, they try to do Gotham. Gotham was like, hey, we're gonna do Batman's world, but not Batman. Now, think about that is Batman's world is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Rogues Gallery, the lore, like everything around it. So you could take Batman out and just have shows around in that realm. And DC showed this with Penguin, where you can Batman's world is so interesting and deep that you don't need Batman, but he's looming always, even if he's not physically there. The bad part about Sony's thing is they try to do that similar vibe of like, okay, this is a world that has these people in it, but it didn't have anything connection to Spider-Man. And that's the part that they didn't really get right about about developing that world.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the issue that they had anyway with trying to create this Spider-Man less. Try saying that a bunch of times. Movie universe where it's focusing on all of these characters that come from his story, but the difference between Batman's world and his rogues galleries and the characters that exist in his universe and these spider folk is that when you take Batman out of the equation, Oswald Cobblepot and his story and his background and his narrative is still interesting, and it can be reworked to fit different times and different aesthetics and different narrative suggestions. You know, this time around, this iteration of Penguin is totally different than the one on Gotham, than the one from Danny DeVito in Batman Returns, and even different from the one during the Adam West era. So, and you can look at every single character that has been adapted from Batman stories and say that exact same thing. And like you said, even when he's not there, you still feel his presence loom, whether it be in, like now people have seen Penguin at this point. It's spoiling it for you. I don't care. But at a certain point, at the end, you see after all of that we had witnessed happen, we're left with the last image of the bat signal coming on. And so even without knowing what's happening, we know that Gordon only turns that on in this iteration of the Batman when it's a case that needs the Batman. So anyway, not to talk too much about the Batman, going back to Sony, I honestly had no expectations or desire for a Craven. Craven was probably the least offensive of these type of adaptations, since he lends himself to being the anti-hero. Madam Web was just a completely uninteresting thing, and they had to reconfigure that character so much to get it to work, and it still didn't work. But when you take Spider-Man out of those stories, they just don't work. And I think that's the problem that they now finally have. Even the more successful stuff, or the one successful thing, and success only being that it has 3 films now, and that's Venom. But it's still something that each film I've called pretty much horrible and look as if it was made in the 2000s instead of, 20 years from that period, and just too comedy and too goofy for my life.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you had said something before, in our regular conversations where, successful, stories, they start with the world, they show you the character, and then we get the plot. And I think a lot of times the parts that the Sony verse, if you want to call it that way, is they just didn't really establish this world. And so I think even those small touches that the MCU does right when they do their stuff, like you're even like what was X-Men 97 did this perfectly, right? There's a good scene where Rogue's gonna go do something and she's all pissed about it, and then she runs into Captain America. You fight Captain America real quick, but it just gives you a little glimpse that like in this world of X-Men, Captain America exists. Or when big world event happens, they say reactions from a Daredevil, a Spider-Man, or whatever, just to let you know, hey, in this world, these are all the people that exist in it, whether we tell you about them or not. And that's the part where everything in the Sony,
Or whether you see them or not, and whether or not they are active in the story that you're watching, though that they exist. And that's pretty much how the world works. You feel like your story is your story, and sometimes it encompasses other individuals, but it's your story at the end of the day. So it's about choices that you have to make.
exactly. And so you're telling me that all this craziness and Venom happened, and like you don't see Craven reading the newspaper about some random spidery thing running around fucking San Francisco, or Madam Web's in New York at a certain time period. Like it's just there's like the MCU did good jobs at the very least linking those small little things, and just again that's a one line of dialogue, that's a 30 seconds of a scene to connect those things. But in all these films, they're just standalones of these like types of characters purely because they have the license for those characters. Just like, what are we gonna do with it? Let's.
And it's obvious. And one of the things that it looks like more now, I think, to the majority of fandom is it just looks petty, because they're just doing this again because they have, like you just said, because they have the rights and they don't want to relinquish them to Marvel. So they're just like, we're going to just do everything we can with the Spider-Man universe until we exhaust it so much that nobody wants to see Spider-Man anymore. And then we'll sell the right back, or release the rights back to Disney on some deal. Because that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to milk that cash cow as much as possible until it's dry, and then they're going to return it to its rightful, or its new overlord.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing where it's like, again, if Sony was smart, they would have like they would have had this conversation. Like one of the things that the Sinister Six, the reason why they are the Sinister Six is because they all kept getting their ass beat by Spider-Man individually. And then they come together to take out Spider-Man because they all hate Spider-Man for whatever their specific reasons are. So and it would have made more sense if Spider-Man had fought all six of them, and then from that we had six movies after. I'm not saying we need to have six, but that would have been more logical, and from a plot narrative, at least it would make sense. But now you have Venom comes in, and to their credit with Venom, they're not good movies at all. I've only watched the first one. I can't do the other two. Just I have no patience. But at the very least, Venom has enough there to flesh out, to have fun, and they're making enough money to keep making more. So they made those their three, at least they got their dough from that. But like the Madam Web shit was stupid because it was just like, what is the actual point of Madam Web? If I didn't know nothing, if I know nothing about anything, and I get presented this character of Madam Web, it's almost just like, what? Why?
And if you do know or are familiar with Madam Web from her small role in Spider-Man's world, you know that she's largely one of those guy type of characters, the guy or gal in the seat. But in her case, in an extra dimensional weird web thing that she uses her psychic abilities to help Spider-Man, and she's also blind. So, all these, like, that's why I said they had to reconfigure and remake that character so much because of who was portraying her, that she in the end didn't look like anything resembling the character that it's based on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because the supporting cast for Madam Web, there's something there, but it just wasn't enough connective tissue, right? Like I would have like if we were gonna redo Madam Web and Craven, same thing. I would have had Craven as the bad guy in one of the Spider-Man movies or a flunky or some shit like that. So at the very least, there's a context of why he's a thing, and you get to find out, oh, here's the backstory like we don't need. Madam Web, same thing. You know, if Tom Holland's Parker had ran into her as an old lady, and she tells him to go save this person, or MJ's gonna die, and blah 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 blah. Then all of a sudden, boom, who's Madam Web? Here's her origin story. Okay, cool. But since they had no connective tissue, it just falls apart, and Craven's about to suffer that same fate. Other thing it reminds me of, there is way too much money in the world. We just be greenlit $100 million movies for no reason. No one is gonna flop. Like what?
Movies that waste that amount of money, and you think about it like, there is a whole area, a neighborhood, almost mini city within LA. It's called Skid Row. It's composed of homeless people who don't have any money or any food to feed themselves or any shelter. They could hey, and Sony, here's an idea. Instead of funding the Hobgoblin movie, let's give that, let's cut a check to Skid Row and build some shelters and some affordable housing and food and all that stuff for people. Nah. They'd rather just make a dumb movie
Yeah.
uh featuring a character who only works well when he or she is up against or paired with the hero of the story that they belong to. You can't do that with every character, with every superhero.
And in stark contrast, you know, Craven in the Spider-Man 2 game has done really well, right? There's a whole interesting story behind it. He's pretty menacing. It makes sense why his character is doing what he's doing. And he's clearly a villain, which I think is cool. Um, in stark contrast, we just had Creature Commandos that just dropped from DC, kind of re-kickstarting the new DC universe. And like I know you watched it a little bit. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm hearing good things. But one of the things that also got announced recently was they're going to do a standalone Clayface movie, and it was interesting because what James Gunn said was like, "Hey, one of the things I want to establish with this quote unquote new universe is that it's a big universe that can have multi layers. So we could do cartoons, we could do TV shows, we could do movies. It's all in the same sandbox, but we can also have a rated R movie, but we also have some family friendly. We can also have some teen stuff." But his whole thing is like, we want to make sure that everyone realizes for this universe that we're creating, nothing is off the table, any type of a media, and it all plays in this little sandbox. And I think that's a great approach to take it, because then not everything needs to be, $100 million movie. Sometimes it could just be like Penguin, a small little, TV series that gets it right, or it can be an animated feature that also gets it right. And so I like what they're doing with that sandbox of just saying, hey, this is the sandbox we get to play in. We're going to try to do different types of things because we think certain characters work better in these areas. And I think that's a very smart play.
I agree, and I think that what it does, because then I think the simple way that he identified for people to understand it is what he's trying to build is more like Star Wars, probably with a tighter continuity, um, but continuity in canon, but less about you having to watch every single thing to know where to orient yourself to the story that you're watching. And it's not, because I think the problem that the MCU ended up having overall is that after the first phase of Avenger films, they had tied most of the stakes to that for every single protagonist or superhero. So when that was over, you're left with the kind of, well, what do we do next? And even though that's always the case, you would expect there would be kind of a plan in place to usher us out of one era and into another, which is why I said, you know, the X-Men can't come and Fantastic Four can't come too soon. You know, I have my worries about how it'll be executed and handled, but we'll see. Um,
Yeah.
but Creature Commandos, for instance, you know, you immediately when you get into it, James Gunn I told Josh offline, I said, we need to make him the Patriot Saint of Blerdlines for the one line of dialogue, because literally in a conversation between Rick Flag Sr. and Amanda Waller, who is still the Amanda Waller from the Viola Davis Amanda Waller that we've seen in DCEU, coming over to the new DCU. He's carrying over some things, and that's why I was talking about Peacemaker, and I was, saying that after I watched it, um, I was like, I don't know how he doesn't include this, if his first chapter of DCU is called Gods and Monsters, this plot lends itself perfectly to that setup, and establishing the sort of alien cosmic stuff that is already at work and already there. They even established that metahumans are known. And so that to me was a good way of cutting around having to explain all of that stuff in your big budget films. Like you said, you can find different ways. And that's one of the things that Creature Commandos is. In one line of dialogue, we got the finale of where things stood, an update of where things stood with with Amanda Waller after the the outcomes of Peacemaker, of that story of season 1. And so we immediately know, okay, this is taking place after that. Here we're seeing the consequences and fallout of, and I don't know if you saw Peacemaker, so I'm not getting specific with what happened, but the again, the Rick Flag Jr. character, they mentioned two things. They reference the Rick Flag scene. They referenced his son being killed, which we saw that in the Suicide Squad. And we know that Peacemaker is the one that killed him. And so he automatically gives us, okay, this could be something down the road. We might see Frank Grillo's Rick Flag Sr. appear in later seasons of the live action of Peacemaker. So again, patron saint of using natural dialogue to orient the audience and set things up, but not have it be exposition where it's explaining what happened. He didn't say, "Oh, that time when you sent Task Force X to fight the Starro creature, and then Peacemaker murdered my son." No, it wasn't like that. It was just kind of a mention of, ever since, you lost your son, and then he cut to the Rick Flag scene, and he has that look where he closes his eyes for a brief moment, and then they talk about, then they keep it moving with what's happening at hand. And again, the same thing with the conclusion of Peacemaker season 1, and what was specifically speaking to what was it, not recapping the whole plot of that season. So you would still have to go watch it if you're interested, but specifically targeting what went down for Waller. What were the stakes for her? Because here she is once again with putting together a new team.
Yeah, she has bad luck with teams, basically.
Well, she's just so dang ruthless, man. Like that, like her teams aren't really gung ho for her necessarily, as much as they're just like, I don't want to get my head destroyed. I don't want to get decapitated by having my head blown off, or like have a jolt of electricity sit directly to my nervous system and render me unconscious for like hours. Like, that's what it is.
And I like it that, like, the one of the things that DC's been doing over in general has just been reorienting Waller as a big bad. And I think it's been a good move for them in live action, but it's been a great move in the comics as well. Not everyone read the comics, but one of the things they've really done in this past year is to show her machinations from the beginning up until now, and how much of she's slowly but surely becoming on the same level as Lex Luthor, on terms of like the cunningness and how her smartness is, which is one, we just need a badass black woman doing crazy shit. And I think I like that they've carried that over into the live action with because James Gunn's like, he's picking the pieces of the old DCEU that were actually working and then bringing it into this, and then
that were good. And he's like, we can still, here's some things we can still work with. They still have the ability to bring what's his name, Bloodsport, Idris Elba's Bloodsport back. He could be, I would be surprised if he didn't appear in Creature Commandos at some point. Or in future movies. But I think he's setting it up in a way that is the way that you would expect and a storyteller first to approach it, and keenly aware of the fact that it's still a business. So that's why I said, like, for the first time in a long time, I'm actually looking forward to a Superman film. For the first time in a long, even when Man of Steel was released, I was not looking forward to that because of who was directing.
Yeah.
And I knew Snyder, even his reputation, even then, I was like, the chances of this movie being good are slim and none. It looks like he's just trying to mimic what Christopher Nolan had just done with the Dark Knight trilogy. And I knew that wasn't going to work for Superman.
Yep.
Because nobody wants the Dark Superman unless it's a specific story. Like, we know that there are specific, but nobody, at the whole Jesus element and God complex that he was putting on Kal-El, like that, even in the Dark Knight Returns, that wasn't how he approached it. He just looked like a fool.
Yeah.
I didn't tell. Like a Boy Scout, at the end of the day, the whole point of that story was that he had become the ultimate Boy Scout and American tool, in that he had just basically adapted the politics and policies of whatever America thinks is best is which way I'm going to go. And that didn't work for Batman, and that's what brought him into conflict. Is that.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to like leave that off of. And I think, like I said, I'm all of us are more curious to see what Gunn's going to do in general. But so far, all the moves and small moves he's been making have all been in a good light. I think I like that. I'm glad that this is happening, because then it's showing that it can be done. And I think that's the one thing where, Marvel and Disney knew they messed up when they fired him that one time. And then they brought him back just for Guardians, and he did exactly what he wanted to do. He was like, yo, I'm going to show you guys how to actually make a good film with the ensemble cast that has some heart. He killed it with Guardians 3, and he's like, all right, I'm out. I'm about to go do some DC shit for the next 20 years.
Yeah, where I have my hand on the wheel. I can I know, and that's the thing. He knows when to do his shit, and then he's going to know when to step aside and let the creative he just be 100% the stopgap, but to allow those other creatives to do their thing with the stories that they're telling in the sandbox. I think the thing that Marvel needs to take note is the amount of creativity and things that they're trying to do that's different from what was before. Like a Batman film that doesn't feature Batman in the name, or reference any of his nicknames. The Dark Knight still references his nickname. Still, when you hear Batman, you know that's the Dark Knight, it's Batman. But to have a film where it's like, oh, it's just called The Brave and the Bold, and he's been kidding about it. He's like, look, when people talk about cats, like, I'm not satisfied with the script. I think that he said something similar about the Booster Gold recently when people were asking about, I forget his name, who might be cast as, he also was in Turtles.
Was it not Glenn Powell, one of the other white dudes?
No, it's actually
Kamal and Najani.
Yeah, Kamal Najani. Yes, Kamal's the.
That's not a bad casting if that actually pulled.
Not at all. He would be perfect for Booster Gold.
Totally. But you're right. I think I think that again, it goes back to it shows the amount of leeway that him and his runner has of the
Peterson.
G universe. Yeah, and then when they're like, "Hey, script's not working. We're not going to do it until it gets to the point that we like," and there's no studio head being like, "Nah, we got to do it now." This right there shows that difference, and I think that's the part that's going to be dope. Where like, if Gunn is like, "Yo, man, this shit sucks. We're not going to do it," and then people are like, "Really?"
That's basically what he's saying right now. He's like, look, I'm not saying that Vijani won't be him, won't be the character, but right now I'm not satisfied with where that script is, so we're not talking about it. We're still in that phase of trying to get a script that will work and that we can make into a good film that people will like and that will also make money. And I think that's where the approach that Disney needs to be with both the MCU and with Star Wars, because I think they're struggling on both fronts.
Yeah, agreed.
They have opportunities, like you mentioned earlier with the Sinister Six. If Sony, and that's partially Sony, but if Sony was thinking straight, they could do a deal where they had a certain set of movies that would lead to a Sinister Six that was MCU and Sony infused. And there you have a big tentpole film that you built to, and you can add another character. You can even do the whole see if Andrew Garfield is available. Bring him in, or total, because people love that and they still talking about it, and people still want to see both of those guys as Spider-Man, and they still love Tom Holland. You could work with that. That's money right there. Like, execution is everything. So,
Yeah, and I think that's that's a good place to leave it, because you're right. The execution is everything, and I think the Sony verse will be forgotten as just like basically a big waste of money, and to show the hubris of studios, not A, listening to their creators, B, not understanding what their fans actually want, and then C, just taking a bunch of money and burning it, dude. Like,
yeah, because they can and because they have the IP. And, again, they did something smart when they did the deal with the MCU. They got Spider-Man into Civil War, and then three solo films, and appeared in two Avenger films. Big time money.
yeah,
And the last film they did, it was in recent years, one of the better MCU films that has been done. So it's just odd to me that they were like, okay, we're just gonna double down on making all these, but when the second one didn't work, here we gonna, let's just go ahead and go with the third one, maybe 3 times the charm. I guess 4 times, because you got to count Venom first.
yeah, exactly. And the last thing I'll say is, the writers are credited for doing the Equalizer series and then Punisher Warzone, which not good but super entertaining. But yeah, so once again, as we talk about all the time, how do these people still keep getting jobs? Because they show that they can't. Like, Equalizer series, super fun, but like, when you do bad films and you still get work, it always baffles me. But at the same time, I'm also reminded. It just reminds me of, oh yeah, you got to know people. You got to know your peoples, and they keep throwing you on jobs until you can get a hit, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how the business goes on that level. But
Yeah,
here we are.
yes, sir. All right. Well, thanks for everybody for letting us rant for a little bit about bad movies and bad universes. Shout out to patron saint James Gunn for once again showing it how it's done, for one line of dialogue to connect, to literally connect like two films and a TV show in a cartoon.
Yeah, like he just thanks for just confirming what we believe, which is, it's all about how you tell a story more than it is of what the story actually is.
100%, 100%. But yeah, thanks for everybody for listening, and we'll see you guys later.
Peace.
Peace.